I'm Nina Gopal. Welcome to Global Express. This is where we take a close look at events in our immediate neighborhood and beyond on events that impact India. Today, we're looking at attempts to stop the rapid unraveling of ties between India and its neighbor, the Maldives, ever since the anti-Indian mayor of Male, Mohammed Muizzu, won the presidential polls and has now won a huge majority in parliament, an overwhelming majority. That November victory seemed like a signal that was no longer going to be business as usual with India, that the pro-India tilt pursued by his predecessor, Ibrahim Soli, was over. And that the India Out campaign, which Muizzu had co-opted from the former president, Abdullah Yameen, who was very pro-China, would now be the way forward on relations with India. But the wind seems to be shifting. One, the Maldives foreign minister, Moosa, arrived in Delhi on his first visit. Second, India has withdrawn the last of the remaining Indian military personnel of the original 88, a day ahead of the May 10th deadline set by the president. Is a course correction underway? And what made India agree to replace the military staff and leaving the Dornier aircraft and the helicopters and their personnel at a hospital? Just to revisit the sticking point, we all know that under Soli's presidency, India had, and even before, India had lent the Maldives National Defense Forces 3 Indian aircraft and personnel for search and rescue, against which the Muizzu's party whipped up a huge storm of protests. So to most analysts, this plays into the hands of the pro-China lobby led by Yameen and his former protege, Muizzu. And China is actively driving a wedge between India and its neighbors, particularly with Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Bhutan, Nepal, and now the Maldives. These are all countries seen as close to India. There is another angle which I would like to pursue with you guys. But so let's start today. We've got 3 extremely well-informed experts to take us through this new take. We have Dr. Ahmed Shahid, former foreign minister of the Maldives. He served as foreign minister in President Mohammed Nasheed's government and Maumoon Abdul Gayoom's. And he oversaw the transition of the Maldives to an Islamic democracy. An internationally recognized expert on human rights, chairperson of the Geneva-based human rights think tank Universal Rights Group that he founded. He's professor of human rights practice at the University of Essex in the UK. I believe you're also an expert on the Balkans and on Iran and the special reporter to the UN. Truly impressive, sir. Thank you, Dr. Shahid, for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me this evening.
We also have with us someone to whom literally everyone turns to when the Maldives-India relationship blows up, or even when it's sailing through smooth waters. Veteran journalist, political and foreign policy analyst, Mr. Satyamurthy, is a political commentator who writes extensively on Sri Lanka and the Maldives. Welcome, Mr. Satyamurthy.
Thank you.
And we're extremely pleased to welcome Dunya Mamoon, the first female Minister of Foreign Affairs. She played a key role in re-energizing her country's ties with key neighbors like India, Sri Lanka, and Pakistan. She's also a gender equality advocate and promotes women's rights. Welcome, Ms. Mamoon.
Thank you.
So the first question, I'm going to come to you, Dr. Shahid. Something has obviously changed since the India Out campaign that was started by President Abdullah Yameen and then co-opted by President Mohammed Muizzu. Do you see a shift in the India-Maldives narrative? I mean, we have your foreign minister, Mr. Zameer, trotting out all the usual platitudes after his 3-day visit. He said it was a good visit. He and India's foreign minister had fruitful discussions, that economic cooperation with India was integral part of the Maldivian economy. He apologized also for the 3 Maldivian deputy ministers making derogatory remarks against India and Prime Minister Narendra Modi on social media after Modi posted photos of him walking in Lakshadweep. So tell me, what is this a 360-degree turn? Is it expected?
I think this was always expected. A couple of things. First of all, I always saw a nuance in the old India Out campaign because the focus was on military presence in the Maldives. That's something people would oppose no matter which country had send those boots to the ground, as it were. So there was a nuance in that. But nevertheless, of course, the shift was quite evident in terms of tilt towards China and a bit distancing from India. But I think you should remember the timing of the visit. The current government has just got past the local elections, which have ensured them a secure tenure. There was always the threat of an impeachment of the president or of ministers being impeached under the previous parliament. So having won a major election, I think one of the first priorities has been, in this case, to address foreign relations. And I think the first country to turn to, of course, is India. So I think this was always expected. And also there is no choice really for the Maldives. And I think from India's perspective as well, I think India does require a stable, prosperous democracy in the Maldives. And that can come with India's support and collaboration. So I think there's a mutuality of interest here. Certainly, I think quite a significant inflection point from the current government's perspective in regard to its attitude towards India. A very welcome change in my view.
Oh, that's good to know. Do you agree with that, Mr. Satyamurthy? I mean, there are two batches of military personnel which were pulled out early. They were pulled out in March, they were pulled out in April, and the final batch was withdrawn a day before Mr. Moosa Zameer arrived. So it's almost like India has made, a huge sort of move to appease the Muizzu government. I mean, they're going to continue with the aviation platform. They're going to make it from a military presence to a medical evacuation service. But will that help paper over the differences that seem to have erupted?
I agree with Dr. Shahid for most parts. Basically, the Muizzu government also asked only for the withdrawal of Indian military personnel. So the 3 aircraft were gifted by India, so it belongs to Maldives. There was no question of India wanting to take back or taking it back. Now India has sent civilian pilots and technical personnel to handle those missions. That is how it is. And 2, even with this was the only sticking point between the two countries since Muizzu became a candidate. China-Maldives relation, Maldives-India relations, they travel on parallel paths. You can say, if you say Soli is pro-India, Muizzu and Yamin were pro-China. Neither of them was anti-other side. For instance, even Soli, President Soli, my Maldivian friends will agree, 2 weeks before the elections, the first round elections, his government signed 2 major agreements for 100-bed hospitals, tertiary hospitals, one in the north, closer to Indian shores, and one in the south, closer to the Indian Ocean. And another was to set up solar power batteries on 24 islands. So this kind of development funding by both countries have been there for the past 10-15 years. When one is there actively, the other plays down, or other is played down by the government of Maldives of the day, and the vice versa. The question for India and Maldives to sort out otherwise, because India has been pumping in funds, investments. No one is saying that India is going to take it back or not continuing. If you recall, after the first core group meeting fixed by the President Muizzu and Prime Minister Narendra Modi that happened in Mali earlier this year, both sides agreed that they will fast track Indian investment that are pending and fast track Indian projects, including the prestigious Tilamale Bridge, etc. So that are not issues. The concern is how to work out the trilateral dynamics on the security front, India, Maldives, and China. But as Muizzu said immediately after taking over, and yesterday Minister Moosa Zameer reiterated, they say we have no defense agreement, security agreements with China.
That's right.
They say we have to see it on the ground in the coming years that no foreign military will be allowed to be there, as they have to define it, because right now, last week there was a US military group there, for training. So what they mean by foreign military? Is it something like the Indian pilots who were placed there, or training will also not happen? If training is allowed, will Indian military personnel be invited to give training or join training, join joint exercises between the two countries? But we also have to remember, after Muizzu became president earlier this year, Maldives hosted the 16th the thing, Coast Guard exercise, those the exercises
Right.
involving Maldives, India, and Sri Lanka. So,
Yes.
to that extent, I think India can feel confident that they can proceed on the right track with this government also. But the irritants remain one, and a lot of misinformation is going around through the media in India and the social media in Maldives. This is borne out by the lack of information, knowledge, and understanding of each other's situation. And these are mostly politically motivated, I'm sorry to say. But for instance, if we say, in India, the government of India, no official has ever opened his mouth on any of these issues. It is the social media and the so-called elitist, well-enlightened commentators who are messing up with things. I'm sorry
So
to
if
say.
I can just bring you in, Ms. Dunya Mamoon, looking back, do you see it as an election ploy by Muizzu to mobilize voters? I mean, did he use the India Out campaign to do that? Because I mean, look, it looks as if India is back in. I mean, from India Out, I think it's India in now,
No, I actually have a
and only because he has a parliamentary majority, and he knows no
yes,
one
yes.
can challenge that.
I think
You don't
looking at
agree?
our region, I think I mean a lot of international experts have been commenting on this, and we know of the power struggle that is happening, geopolitical reasons in the Indian Ocean, and how Maldives is a very strategic location. Unfortunately, we seem to have gotten into this competition between rivals, and as we have seen governments that are in the pendulum swing or shifting from side to side, and we've seen it in other countries, including Sri Lanka, Nepal, Bangladesh. So in Maldives from 2008 onwards, I feel that we have been seeing either pro-India government, a pro-China government, back to pro-India, and back to pro-China again now. And personally, I feel that it has not really served Maldives' interest to get into this rivalry or competition that is happening. And often these governments are backed and supported by these countries, unfortunately. Maldivians have clearly been able to vote out presidents that they have felt have not been competent in delivering on the promises for the people. My own worry is, and I think Dr. Shahid, as he mentioned, was key in bringing about what we call our modern democracy in the Maldives, including multi-party system. Unfortunately, I do not think that this democracy is being strengthened, and I do not see how our foreign relations is actually assisting or supporting Maldives' own independence and sovereignty, and our search to strengthen our institutions so that our leaders and politicians are accountable to our people. And it is sad to say that the other countries that we are discussing here seem to be involved in promoting their own interests at the cost of the country. And of course, the foreign military presence issue has become a highly political one. And it was one that President Yamin, during his time or tenure even, given the history of what had happened with the GMR issue and other issues in the Maldives, President Yamin had a very anti-India stand, I would say. And then when he was voted out, obviously, India would have had a strong role in that. And subsequently, President Yamin ended up in prison, and PPM, we all saw what was happening. So President Muizzu did run on that campaign. It was an anti-India campaign. However, once elected into government, I think all countries have to deal with the reality of the government in place. And President Muizzu himself has shown that he went against the tradition of Maldivian presidents who normally make their first state visit to India. In fact, he traveled first to Turkey, then to China and other countries, and it's only now that we see, and I welcome the visit by Foreign Minister Moosa Zameer, And I hope that it does help in repairing a much damaged relationship. Much of it, I think, also our fault, meaning on the Maldivian side, we saw this social media issue, very disrespectful language, and of course, India being a strong, close friend from historical times, I think it's important that we do not undermine those relationships at any
That's
time.
very well said. No, in fact, Dr. Shahid, if I can come back to you, I was also told by someone that that the original offer the Chinese made to the Maldives in years ago was to offer sea ambulances. And when India did hear about it, apparently they stepped in and said, we can do a aircraft kind of rescue. And so I think I don't know who was the foreign minister then, but this is what I hear, that this is what happened, and that's how it actually came about. But more than that, as Ms. Mahmoon and you and all have said, why is it that there is a sort of a game to play India off against China, which I see across the India's neighbors, because China does step in and offer billions of cash, development. I mean, they build infrastructure projects, and which do benefit the countries that they invest in. But it also is debt diplomacy, and it leaves these countries, particularly the Sri Lanka and the Maldives, and now, of course, Pakistan, in quite a difficult situation. Why is it that they're tempted at all to do business with China?
Well, I think, from the about 25 years now, China has been coming to the Indian Ocean through various, tours and missions and aid and so on and so forth. And countries in the region have had to deal with this in a variety of ways. And so I think I would say under President Gayoom until 2008, he had a very clear vision of what Maldives will be and where it won't be and how it will deal with countries. And he had made his views very clear in a variety of statements. And this was, of course, friendship towards everybody. We were dealing with China on very transparent terms, but we had a very clear plank. That is that we would not do anything that undermine any SAARC relationship. And then, of course, India comes ahead of that, which meant that we had mechanisms of consultation, information sharing that would make us understand each other's priorities and concerns as we went along. And we would not substitute aid from a more distant country to what which can get from a nearer neighbor, especially because terms would be even better for us usually. So I think what democracy has done is, like Mr. said, we've had a change of government every 5 years, or even in less higher frequency, which has meant that there has been no stability in our foreign policy. That is one. And this is also seen in the way the Foreign Office itself has really declined its capacity to support incoming governments, or their willingness to listen to them. The second, of course, is the instrumentalization of foreign relations by all governments are coming. All our neighbors have, China, India in particular, have somehow allowed themselves to be part of the local political football, as it were. So any government would say, I am backed by X power, therefore is seen as representing authority and capacity and so on and so forth, as a way to win votes and maintain the authority. And unfortunately, I think both India and China have themselves, like just now, my colleague just now said, have also played into this game. So as a result, they become the bogey men or bogey people in our local politics, and become easy to get kicked in a political dialogue. But what is missing again, I go back to Mr. Jamil's foreign policy statements. A time when he was speaking, when India had boots on the ground. We had, I don't know how many people we had. We had a massive army in the Maldives, camped in Hulule, looking, after the aftermath of the November 8 attack. And when he spoke at he had a whole paragraph, covering what his vision was. And he spoke about a security community, being built up. What we have not done is developed a sense across both countries that this tie works for the people of both countries, not for the incumbent in New Delhi or in Mali.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Friendship for everybody. So once we get back to that understanding, we don't see India as favoring one party or China as another party. We see them as both serving our requirements. And for any government, the most important thing is re-election. And re-election comes, for the most part, through delivery of their campaign pledges. And that often are infrastructure projects, therefore China. But our reality is we need budget support. I think the current government must be really reeling from the financial crunch that they are facing now. And nobody is prepared or able to give that kind of budget support that New Delhi is able to do. So I think there is really no choice for Maldives than to find some kind of balance between these two competing powers and making sure that we define our, if you like, policy based on geopolitical and other parameters.
That's a very good point. I really like that. Mr. Satyamurthy, would you like to talk us through what is it that does India have a blind spot? Did India have a blind spot with the Maldives? In the Maldives case, I mean, when Ibrahim Solih was president, did they not realize that there was a kind of an undercurrent against their whole, the way they behaved, I suppose, at the Indian embassy, where they had a yoga day, which apparently upset a lot of people? Or did we not reach out to the opposition and not see this coming?
I would not be able to comment on what or how the government of India viewed things as it was evolving. But as someone who has been watching Maldives, observing Maldives, though this time from a distance, I clearly saw early signs of President Solih possibly not being able to win an election.
Really?
I think in the first 2 years of his presidency, it was the writing was on the wall, but things are different when the perspective is different. That is one thing. But having said that, government of India should have reached out in a better way to all political parties in every neighborhood country, which I don't think happened in this way. I'm not sure about it. But maybe it should have been more pronounced and well clear. But we have to look at it from an Indian perspective also, government of India perspective. Here is a political opposition that say India out.
Yeah.
Right? They launched the campaign. And President Yamin, even in the last months of his presidency, started to ask India to get out or take back the military personnel, take back the 3 gifted aircraft, which I don't think in the South Asian context appeals well to any host government. When you give someone and suddenly for domestic political reasons, you say you take it back. That is just not on. So that didn't go down well with the perspective that India has always had for itself and the other South Asian nations. That is one thing. But going beyond it, what could have happened is this anti-India campaign that did not give space for India also to reach out to the political opposition at that time.
That's a
That
good
was
point.
not the case earlier. When President Yamin was in power, India was in touch with the MDP. Likewise, when President Nasheed was in power or President Muizzu was in power, India had contact with all the political parties. This is how diplomacy, as the 2 former foreign ministers here would acknowledge, this is how diplomacy is done. But this time it was a unique situation, I would think.
Yeah, I agree with you. I agree with you. Ms. Mahmood, if I could just come to you, it was also quite remarkable the way that Muizzu himself toned down the rhetoric, especially after India announced that it was going to increase annual aid to the Maldives, and it said it was going to send a steady supply of essentials, including vegetables, food, and construction materials, and that it was going to relax export restrictions. I mean, he did tone down his anti-Indian rhetoric to say that India will remain without question the closest ally of the Maldives. And he urged New Delhi to provide debt relief to his country for the hefty loans that Mali has taken. So, and he also admitted that the only bone of contention between the two countries was, of course, this military personnel. But do you think it was also driven by the fact that there was this huge drop in the number of tourists, Indian tourists to the Maldives? They are the ones who apparently are the biggest money spinners of the economy to boost the Maldivian economy. Do you think it was also driven by that partly?
I actually think, of course, welcoming President Muizzu's comments and also the visit and the efforts that we can clearly and visibly see in terms of strengthening the relationship with India. I have to point out that often rhetoric does not match up with action necessarily. The drop in Indian tourists happened, as we all saw in front of our eyes, for something very preventable that was initiated by President Muizzu's government, where junior ministers had made comments on social media, which I had already remarked were unacceptable at a head of state, including and also to a close friend like India. And this did subsequently obviously cause a lot of mayhem in tourism and the drop in numbers. However, we are not only dependent on the tourist market. I remember a time before COVID when obviously the Chinese market was growing rapidly and China was the #1 visitor to our country. And Maldives tourism, as you know, is world-class and accepted across the world. We have tourists from across the world, including from the UK, from Europe, from, including Southeast Asia as well. So I think what President Muizzu is realizing is when you are in power and the challenges that come with governing and the necessity to have your friends there. And as Shahid has pointed out, the financial situation of our country, I think it's wrong, though, to refer to debt diplomacy only from China alone. And I remember that in terms of looking in detail at the Chinese financing and loans, we could see the concessional loan financing and successful projects that have been implemented by China. And often it is infrastructure. And I'm not saying that we need only infrastructure for developing our country. There's a lot of work we need to do in terms of social sector, on gender, on vulnerable groups, on youth. So many issues to be tackled, and that has to come from a leader with the knowledge and understanding of what the country needs. So I am hopeful that we will see strengthening of the relationship, but I am also skeptical because so much has happened in our history, and so much even by this government that has led to further undermining of this relationship. So with the Chinese kind of becoming closer in terms of ties, I think we have to wait and see what happens in future. And I think China is an important partner for Maldives, obviously, as we can see. And in terms of finance and support, Dr. Shahid mentioned the budget support. And even for that, all I can say is Maldives is not a poor country anymore. It's how we are using the money that's coming in, is how we're managing.
That's right.
That is where the challenge is. And when we have a government which is so politicized, and where even the foreign service is politicized, we are losing the brains, educated people, and they're being replaced by activists, including in government and in parliament. And that's a very bad thing for our country.
That's a very interesting angle. I never thought about that at all. So does that mean there is a kind of the Maldivians are moving away from from contributing to. I mean, it is a very small country and it has a very small population. But I thought education and and gender equality was very high on the agenda.
Not anymore. Unfortunately, with subsequent governments, including from 2008 onwards, when we look at the figures, we can see how the political appointments have been increasing. And if you look at the foreign service, including at the highest levels, where in no country would you see political appointments, we are now seeing missions that are, you have film actors or other people. I'm not offending anybody here, but I think you need high caliber diplomats who are educated, who have the skills to represent our country at these missions abroad. But if you look at the figures, there's increasing numbers because they see it as an easy lifestyle where the government's paying for your children's education and for your family. And that's not what a foreign service is for. And if you look at the civil service, again, very underpaid, unappreciated. And then on top of that, again, more political appointments who come in through activism, which is on the street or in terms of rhetoric at the podium. And that, I think, is not the way our country should be going. And I am sure Dr. Shahid would agree. And from far, he must have been watching what's been happening, and also how we all had hopes for our country in terms of independent institutions, strengthening our country, including the judiciary. But unfortunately, all the governments that we've seen, things have just been going from bad to worse. And if you look at corruption, for example, nothing is done. We look at, big murder cases that have happened in the past years. There's
That's
no
right.
no.
The disappearances, yes.
Yeah. So it's a lot of work to be done, and I hope that President Muizzu and this government and the incoming parliament are going to take these issues seriously and really work honestly and sincerely, because we don't seem to have people with integrity, unfortunately, including.
Dr. Shahid, do you agree with that? I mean, I thought that, I mean, Muizzu starting to work in tandem with China was the first thing that rattled a lot of the Indian analysts. But and the fact that they seemed like they had some kind of a rapport. But now I just felt that with this visit of Moosa Zameer, where they're looking at dates for a possible visit to India by President Muizzu, that India will sort of believe that they can trust Muizzu to do the right thing, and possibly forge ties which will not be where he'll be playing India against China.
First of all, I agree everything that Ms. Dunia just now said about the lack of institutions and how the political process undermined the capacity of civil service to support an incoming government, and also lack of institutions across the country, and how corruption, cronyism have destroyed what we had going to 20 years ago. Interestingly, next month will mark the 20th anniversary of the reform agenda President Gayoom announced, which began all this reform process in the Maldives. So if you look back from that time, there is no real support for incoming government in terms of advice from the from the Foreign Office. The capacity is gone. So any incoming government must have a very sharp learning curve. And if they bring with them people with foreign policy expertise, it's easier for them. If they come without that, it's a hard ride for them, bumpy ride for them. So I don't think that this government came in with that expertise, and I think that's why we see some of these errors coming in. Of course, President Rashid also went to Rome before he went to anywhere else. So going to Turkey by itself doesn't really, mean much. But the fact that there hasn't been a visible prioritization given to India relations is a problem, and that can only come from, I think, a lack of expertise in terms of how to handle, a country's bilateral relationships. So I fully agree with that. But I also want to highlight that the issues of social issues that was just highlighted here. I think if you track in terms of the indicators, we've been going down in this area. Gender equality was, I think, far better 20 years ago than then. Of course, there are certain aspects in which we have improved. But I think in terms of social understanding of gender equality, that has gone down. Our mental furniture has been rearranged in ways that are very misogynistic over the past 20 years or so. I think that's very important. Now, why I'm referring to all this is because the challenge for India and other partners is to find in Maldives institutions that can support a stable country. An unstable, failed state in the Maldives is not in anybody's interest, least of all India's interest, because that only create more difficulties for the country. That's why I'm so pleased that the Indian government received the foreign minister very warmly, as it appears from everything I have seen, and that they have both been able to work out some way of moving forward in a very amicable and positive manner. That has to be the way forward, and that's the only way forward for the Maldives. And this doesn't mean that Maldives has to sacrifice any Chinese relationship, because that's always been based on certain types of investments, infrastructure investments, not political support, not other kind of support. And the only country in the neighborhood which can support our democracy is India. And that's, again, something important to remember.
That's good. That's very interesting. Mrs. Atimurthy, would you like to come in and say something on the fact, I mean, Mr. Zameer did actually go a long way. I mean, he actually openly apologized for the derogatory remarks that were made by those three ministers. I mean, that was quite a gesture on his part. So do you think that the Maldives is actually, stepping, up on rebuilding bridges with India?
I would say, to be frank, that social media post by the three ministers was an one-off affair. I think we should bury it there. Now we have to remember, not only these ministers, but also President Muizzu was new to the job when it happened. And yes, it was wrong and it was impolite in everything. But we shouldn't hang out to that to debate and discuss the Muizzu government for all time to come. Sorry. That is not the way it should be done. One. Two, there is a positive movement forward during Minister Zameer's visit. That has been taken forward. There are a lot of areas where India can help. In fact, Minister Shah particularly will remember during the second half of President Nasheed's short-lived presidency, there were efforts made to, for instance, India is the only country practices, only other country rather, practices both civil law and Islamic law. Attempts were made to educate, expose Maldivian judiciary and legal system to how it can be managed. There were such things, banking efforts were made, initiated, but somehow it got derailed because with the change of government and the priorities of government change. We can't avoid it in a democracy. Then, for instance, I would think, I think my Maldivian friends would agree, jobs are the biggest problem in Maldives. And jobs in their islands. Even yesterday or today I read nearly 4,000 people have moved away from the islands to Malay, and another 1,000 students or 900 students are waiting to be admitted to Malay city school. This means their families are moving away from the island and making Malay even more unlivable. And as my Maldivian friends would agree, social issues is about accommodation, and Maldives, you remember, has the highest rate of divorces in Asia, South Asia in particular. These are not social issues. So, getting jobs, creating jobs. In fact, I remember some of the former presidents started working on working papers on that, but they never got re-elected. Why they didn't start it when they were in power, I don't know. This is an area that India has got a vast experience. India can help both with funding, training, programming, creation of jobs. See, why should Maldives? In fact, this government, Muizzu government, someone has started asking the question. Previous governments also asked, why should Maldives get immigrants to work when there are unemployed youth? There is a cultural issue there that Maldivians know better than I do. How to tackle it? How to create jobs? How to go in for higher education? Mr. Dunya was mentioning about educated people, but that is not the case. Their most education stop with A levels. Yeah.
Ms. Mamoon, is that? I think Satya, are you still there or you dropped?
And Australia or things like that to stop, and that is where India social infrastructure going beyond physical infrastructure.
Right, right. Ms. Mamoon, if I could just bring you in, why did Muizzu go straight to, why did he go to Turkey? What did he expect to get from Turkey? I mean, I understand about China perfectly. I mean, Maldives owes China about $1.3 billion, according to the latest International Monetary Fund data. And Xi Jinping and Muizzu signed some 20 agreements, including one on military equipment and training, even though the foreign minister says there was no military pact. But why Turkey? What was is it about the Islamic, sort of underpinning of the Maldivian, society?
I think so. I think it was a choice made perhaps also due to President Muizzu's own viewpoints. And I think in terms of the Islamic heritage and the commonality of our religion and how Turkey is and has stood up for certain values in Europe and also shown pride in its Islamic history, I think that may be some of the reasons, and the discussions and how it led to some agreements on the military side also was a surprise. But I think in terms of the public, it probably was not a bad choice for his visit to Turkey. So, and also, as you would know, for optics, for local politics as well, visits like that are important, and also the photo opportunities that it offers as well. So yeah, perhaps for those reasons. If I could comment also on a couple of things that Dr. Murthy had raised about jobs. Yes, indeed, we have a very young population, many coming out of our schools and then seeking higher education as well. Creating jobs has been a challenge for many governments, and it's always one of the election pledges. Unfortunately, doesn't materialize into much generally. What I was referring to myself was the fact that we are not utilizing the educated people in the country, because there are many who are not part of political parties or wish to be part of it, and who are not involved in activism as such. Unfortunately, when governments change, the jobs are given at higher levels, including deputy minister or state ministers, and higher, including in cabinet, to relatively uneducated individuals. And this is something that is daily being discussed in our country, including in the social media. We have ministers who have represented Maldives abroad who we feel are not the most capable in terms of bringing up issues or being at fora like the UN or discussing or at certain tables. And it's something that is embarrassing for Maldivians. So these were the kind of things that I was referring to as well. And on gender, Dr. Shahid rightly pointed out, we have actually been going backwards. 93-member parliament, which has only 3 women, is really an embarrassment for our country. And if you look at the political parties, and they gave tickets without a primary election, in many cases, it was almost, for the government party, for example, only 2 men. That does not mean there were not qualified women, there were, but it looks like, I think the whole misogynistic thinking has returned or is getting worse, actually. And that's something that I feel very sad for and embarrassed about for our country. And many other issues, obviously, that we need to deal with, like drugs issues, a huge issue in our countries, many social issues, young people going into crime, gangs happening and linked to politics, which is very unfortunate.
So if I could just come back to you, Dr. Shahid, do you think the vote, this overwhelming vote that President Muizzu won by, I think he won 68 out of 93 seats, and Ibrahim Soli's party barely won 15. Does it also, can we also say that, was it his foreign policy that won him these votes? His foreign policy plank or his domestic plank? What was it that gave him this huge mandate? And what can he do with it? I mean, Dunya Mamoon has, of course, spelled out what he could do, but what else can he do with it? I mean, does he have the wherewithal to understand where it should go?
I think foreign policy played almost no role in the elections to the Majlis, because they're very often based on the individual standing for office, and also the extent to which the government will be able to invest in the projects that the people of that constituency were interested in. So foreign policy was almost not there at all, unlike, of course, the presidential elections, where it did play some role. And I think the other reason why such a switch occurred was MDP itself was split. Remained split, and that's a significant, quite a lethal split for them, because President Nasheed has gone away and the party is without him, and that's quite a big challenge for the party. I was thinking MDP didn't reflect on their loss in the elections to the presidency last year. Had they had done reflection, they would have had some change in some manner of how they were operating. I think they just thought that they can just carry on as if nothing happened. So I think that tone deafness to what people said in September is another factor. And then also the fact that in the period between elections to the presidency and the elections recently, the opposition in parliament seemed to have been hell-bent on demonstrating they will not cooperate with the government. They were all talking about impeaching a president, not confirming ambassadors, not confirming ministers, all showing about disrupting a popular mandate given to a president. That's not rational. That's not going to go down very well with anybody. So these were, I think, crucial elements that helped him win this major victory. I also want to comment on the Turkish visit. I am inclined to not agree that religion played a role here. I'm quite skeptical of anyone who cites religion as a foreign policy activity here. Unlike a President Nasheed, who might need a performative action by going to Saudi Arabia or to some Arab country or Muslim country, so he has non-Western leanings. President Muizzu is quite comfortable in his attachment to Islam as it were. And if religion was a card, why would he go to China as his first official visit? I mean, that doesn't ring to me at all. I think it's all very practical. China was for infrastructure projects. I think Turkey was for airports, or other projects in which Turkey has been working very well on. I think these are very much based on practical benefits they can get either for themselves or for the countries, not to do with religion or other ideas.
That's a good point. And in conclusion, I would actually want to come back to Satya. I don't know whether the three of you would even want to talk about it, but there is a very troubling article which I was reading in another newspaper about the rise of Islamic fundamentalism across the Maldives, and the fact that there were 4 to 5 Maldivians who were involved in the Mumbai bomb blast of India's 26/11. One of them was actually had lived in Bangalore, and he wrecked both Bangalore and spots in Bombay, including Chabad House and so on. Is this an issue at all? I mean, the president's family, his father-in-law Sheikh Mohammed Ibrahim, is supposed to be the founder of the Zameer Salah, and his brother-in-law Abdullah bin Mohammed is supposed to have very strong connections, and there is a very strong story which is making the rounds saying that the Lashkar-e-Taiba is trying to reinvent itself by penetrating both South India and the Maldives and Sri Lanka. Is this something that China too, which must be quite wary about this development, just as India should be? Is there any truth to any of this, or is this just an embellishment of?
There is an increase in Islamic fundamentalism in Maldives over the last 10-15 years, or even earlier to an extent. And terrorism also. In fact, President Nasheed was attacked by terrorists, we are told. And
yes,
the previous government has been brought out the full extent of it. And this government, in fact, the parliament MDP members, Democrat members, Nasheed party members, sought a comment from the government to follow it upon that. But beyond that, yes, particularly during ISIS period, a lot of Maldivians were there fighting, and some of them died. Some of them went there with their infant babies and wives, and they also got killed. Or geosocial happen events across the world, including India and elsewhere. I know about this kind of treatment. In fact, India and Maldives have a counter-terrorism cooperation arrangement. I think that can be continued, revived, revisited to strengthen that kind of a thing. And sharing of information, intelligence, as is already happening in the case of drug menace, drug smuggling, that should be extended and extended. And connecting the president's family member of ideas, I don't think is the right thing. In fact, I shared Dr. Shah's view on President Turkey visit. Remember, all of us have forgotten. Turkey was the only country that took note of the presence of a new mayor in Male and invited the President Muizzu, when he was the mayor of Male, to that country. No other country invited him. He went and spent about a week or 10 days. And in fact, recently he said the Turkish president is gifting some of those drones that the Maldives is buying at a huge budget as a gift because of our personal relations. You know how personal chemistry works in diplomacy. I think until we have got other reason to go beyond that, we should leave it at that. And one word before I finish about the parliament elections. I share Dr. Shah's view. MDP went overboard with that way they handled their majority in that interregnum of 6 months, which will end on May 28, when the new parliament takes over. In the first week itself, they started talking about impeaching the president. And in fact, then they amended the majority rule in parliament, which happily the Supreme Court struck down, thankfully. And things like that. Every other day, the MDP, under a new leadership, was bent on harassing, be seen as harassing the new government and the president without letting him to settle down. If you look at the voting figures, I'm sure even general traditional MDP voters voted against them this time, just to ensure that the new president got his full 5 term and a stable government. Remember, in 2018 also, President Soli got a super majority. So Maldivians have come to believe, like in other democracies also, if it's a presidential form, the third world democracies, I would say, the president and the government should get a supportive parliament, which is what Muizzu's main campaign point was. He did not talk foreign policy in parliament election campaign. He did not talk about India out campaign. His India out campaign was confined only to pulling out Indian military, which was a legacy issue which he could not have escaped, because he just slipped into Yamin's candidacy overnight. And he also inherited that legacy electoral issues, political issues, and the constituency, which was more important. So he played along. We have to really see the real Muizzu, if there is one, in the coming months and years. Until then, we have to wait and give him the time.
Yeah. Ms. Mamoon, concluding remarks before I give the floor to Dr. Shahid to give us a wrap up. Do you think that India has got its foot back in the door and it's no longer the bad boy? Do you think President Muizzu can be trusted to take India-Maldives ties further?
I think the relationship will continue to be strained, but given the reality and the efforts being made on both sides, I think Maldives government and President Muizzu accepts the geopolitical reality and the historical ties with India, but I don't see it being what it was under President Mohammad Solih, for example. And just to comment on the other issues you were talking about, of course, on terrorism and extremism, I condemn those and the attacks that's happened, including on former President Nasheed. And you mentioned the Mumbai bombings, and of course, our condolences once more and sympathy with horrific acts that were carried out. I have no idea about the links and would not like to comment on what you had mentioned on President Muizzu's family connections or anything like that. Apart from that, yes, growing Islamic fundamentalism is an issue in Maldives. We are proud of our Islamic heritage. We're coming from that background, but we have seen how extremism can affect so many things, including in our own country, and particularly on gender and women. And I think it's important that we work to portray Islam for the gentle religion that it is, and in terms of how it promotes equality, particularly between men and women, as well as on how it preaches on many issues of life. And that's what I wanted to comment on as my final comments. Thank you once again for the opportunity. It's a pleasure to join you all.
Dr. Shahid, I'm going to hand over to you to make concluding remarks on where we are and how we're going to take this forward.
First of all, I'm very grateful for the insightful comments made by the co-panelists. Very, very, very useful in terms of learning more about how India-Maldives ties can be made better or where they are right now. I think looking at the past is important in terms of looking at the future. And I see in the past 5 years a case of tail wagging the dog, as it were, in the sense that India allowed itself to be pulled by whichever direction the government of the day wanted India to be presented in the Maldives. As a consequence, I think public diplomacy element was, I think, ignored. India has a preeminent position in the Maldives. Cultural diplomacy, public diplomacy, all of these can work for India, in addition to bilateral state-to-state engagement. But I think it allowed itself to be monopolized by the bilateral, if you like, space it got, which it was then domestically projected as India backing one government over others. This was, I think, lethal for that relationship. But India was never out from Maldives. It'll never be out of Maldives because of these other aspects of connection we have with India. The question, therefore, is, would both be now in a position to build on the, if you like, the new friendship that's emerging between two ministers, as it were, in terms of making it felt more broadly across the broader relationship, and go back to what it was, perhaps, decades ago, and so on and so forth. So make it more stable going forward. And for me, that would depend on economic diplomacy, public diplomacy, cultural diplomacy, network, the whole range of bilateral relationships, which India has, like I said, an advantage over anybody else. That's important. But also, I think, looking at the other issues raised by my co-panelists here about social issues in the Maldives, which can really explode into a very nasty situation. Yes, radicalization is a challenge in the Maldives. The Mumbai attacks happened when I was in government in the Maldives, and I had traveled to India just shortly after that. We heard outside, in terms of not from government sources, but we heard that Maldivians may have been involved in this, but it was never confirmed to us. But we wouldn't be surprised because there are many Maldivians living in various parts of the world. They are open to radicalization, and they could get engaged in things. And we also should bear in mind that Islam in Maldives is not homogeneous. There are, we think of Islam as one religion, it is, but then we have, like you mentioned, we have Salafists, we have other groups, and so on and so forth. And you can't lump them all together. And you have to look at how these internal debates, divisions, discussions, all pan out. The thing to do would be to provide the space for respectful discourse among these groups, to build institutions that have the capacity to maintain peace. And with regard to counter-terrorism, again, ensuring that India is able to build the capacity of Maldivian actors in this space to maintain their own, if you like, competence in the country, but also maintain a politically, if you like, sanitized link with India that will not change every 5 years because the government is changing in the Maldives or in India. And that crucial institution building is also important moving forward. But I think we have an opportunity to go past the difficulties of the past few months, and I hope that my Maldivian colleagues, compatriots, keep it in that direction. Thank you.
That's very interesting. Thank you very much. So there is a Maldives reset with India, from India first to India out to India in, I think. So thank you very much for coming on the show, Ambassador Ahmed Shahid, Mr. Satimurthy, and Ambassador Dunya Mamoon. Thank you very much for watching, viewers. Please click on the Global Express icon in Insta and share. Thanks again.